Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Classical Antiquity Sidequest, a podcast covering topics from classical antiquity. The period of time is known for, as Edgar Allan Poe put it, the glory that was Greece, the grandeur that was Rome. Our next side quest will take us to the small screen, and it will take us to the big screen, or soon to be big screen. The small screen is going to involve the Peacock series, Those About to Die. And then we are going to talk about an upcoming movie, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. And our guide for this side quest is a returning guest, Dr. Monica Cyrino. Monica Cyrino, how are you?
I am good, Ben. How are you this lovely morning? Or at least it
I'm
is in Los Angeles.
That's right. It's just after 1 o'clock here. I'm doing better than I will be when I go outside to cut the grass this afternoon because my son, who was supposed to do this all summer in return for burning out the clutch on our car and having to work off that debt, is on a 2-week trip for school through school to France, Spain, and he might be in Italy now. I'm not sure, but that's where he
Wow,
is.
nice life. I think our field trips back when I was a kid was like, La Brea Tar Pits and Universal Studios if we got lucky.
Yeah, he has had some activities and opportunities that I didn't, and I never cease to miss an opportunity to remind him of that. So
That's right. Is it
he's
still a
got that.
billion degrees there in the
Yeah,
back
but
east?
it's like well, where he is, it's like 100 degrees, and there is
Yeah, I
no
saw that it was
AC.
100 in Rome. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it started to cool off a little bit here. Let me see. What my phone says, it's 87, which is
Mm.
tolerable. So
Mhm.
not bad. And it's not quite as humid today as it has been,
Mhm.
which is helpful. But we took some warm weather to us when we went to Scotland, and it followed us back. It has been
Yeah.
toasty.
Yeah. It's been very warm there, and I don't know what's going to happen the rest of the summer. I'm lucky to be right on the coast, but usually it's gloomy in the morning until until at least noon or 1 o'clock right here. I'm literally like half a mile from the beach, less than that. And it's already sunny. So, if you just go 5 miles inland, it's probably already 90 degrees. So, but it's a dry heat.
That's something. I don't know what that means some days. But since you have last been on, why don't you tell us
Yes.
what you have been up to and what you have planned? We talked a little bit about that
Yeah.
before I hit record. So tell us what you've been up
Yeah.
to.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I know Ben that you know that I'm a big sports fan, and a lot of people have mentioned to me, Monica, you work on movies that represent the ancient world and so forth. But have you ever done anything specifically on athletics or sports or the actual sports entertainment complex in the ancient world? And I thought about it. Obviously, I've written about gladiators quite a bit, about the movie Gladiator, about Spartacus, and the whole thing. But I'm obviously not, you know, that's not my area in terms of training. Was that I'm not a Roman historian. I'm a pop historian of classical reception. But for a new project that I'm working on, sort of serendipitously, there was a new television series, a streaming series that came out late last summer um, I guess it was on Peacock here in the US. I can't remember what it was on in Europe. It might have been Amazon Prime. But it was Peacock here, and it was called "Those About to Die," which is a famous phrase in English. It's a translation of what we think the gladiators said to the emperor or to whatever VIP was hosting the games. Those about to die salute you. We who are about to die salute you. It was a common sort of respectful thing that gladiators would say to the reigning VIP at the games, right? It then became the title of this very pulpy book from the 1950s by a guy called Daniel Mannix, who is an interesting character himself. Was a filmmaker who made like training films for the U.S. I'm pretty sure it was the Marines, but one of the U.S. services, and he was like a lion tamer and a like just he just had this really exotic life. But he wrote a book called Those About to Die. I think it came out in 1958. And it was kind of a mashup of Roman history and some sort of historical fiction about various gladiators and stuff. And it was not really well received. Let's put it that way. It was, eviscerated by the academics and wasn't super popular. Anyway, it's kind of stuck around for, all this time as a sort of title or an IP. And when the showrunners of this new series decided to make their show, I thought it was kind of odd that they would choose that title because it was already the title of a book that was not super well received. So the new series is called Those About to Die. And I did not go into it with very high expectations, even for someone like me who in general doesn't have high expectations of anything. And I don't, I'm not snooty. I love trashy entertainment. So I didn't care. But it actually is a very interesting series. So that's what I'm working on now. I'm working up a presentation. My first presentation on this new show will be at the end of July. I'm going to New Zealand to the university, to Victoria University at Wellington in New Zealand to deliver a fairly prestigious lecture, if I may say so myself, called the Sir Ronald Syme Lecture. Sir Ronald Syme was one of the most famous Roman historians, born in New Zealand, and so he endowed this lecture series. So anyway, there's only been, I don't know, maybe 20 or so lecturers and only a couple of women, I might mention. So anyway, so I'm going to deliver the Syme lecture at the end of July. And my topics, in honor of Sir Ronald's, massive contribution to Roman historical studies, is going to be looking at the sport of chariot racing, and how that is represented in film. Obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of it because we have a lot of data about chariot racing, which was so hugely important in Roman entertainment, Roman cultural life, and then looking at the transition from chariot racing as the premier form of sports entertainment for the Roman populace to large scale gladiatorial shows. Now, we also know gladiators and gladiator fights had been part of Roman society and Roman entertainment for a long time. Started out with some ritual aspects to it, parts of funerals and so forth, but then it grew into something that we all know because we've all seen the movie Gladiator, and some of us had the misfortune of seeing the second movie Gladiator.
Uh,
We know that it grew into this big thing, right? By the time the time that the movie Gladiator is set in the time of in the second century AD. But when did that happen, right? When did that happen? When did we get the Colosseum, for example, right? So what's cool about this new series, we can talk about its specific merits or faults, and there are many of both. What's really cool about this series is that it takes that very moment in 79 AD to 80 AD or CE as we say now, when the Vespasian, the Flavian family, the Emperor Vespasian, and then his two sons after him, the three of them together form a kind of mini dynasty called the Flavians. When they built then what's the word? They inaugurated. They opened.
I'd say christened, but I don't think
Yeah,
that's
no,
the
you
right
can't say
term.
that.
Yeah.
They built the Colosseum, which is technically the term is the Flavian Amphitheater because it was built by this family. And they inaugurated it. They opened it. It premiered in 80 AD with this, massive set of, 100 days of games. So the series looks at those years, and it's not quite sure if there's going to be a second season of it, but so the series looks at the first few episodes. We have Vespasian. He never got to see the opening of the Colosseum of the Flavian Amphitheater because he died before that in 79 AD, and his son Titus took over and was emperor for just a couple of years. Died a little suspiciously, and then Domitian, the third one, became emperor. So The series looks at the end of the building of the Colosseum, the opening of the Colosseum, and then it ends, spoiler alert, I guess it's historical, so it's not really that much of a spoiler, with the death of Titus and the accession of his brother Domitian, who then I think reigns for quite a while, like something like 12 or 15 years. But anyway, so I was thinking, wow, that's kind of a cool hook, right? That's a really cool narrative concept. And the show not only looks at the series not only looks at chariot racing and how popular that was, transitioning to these big shows in this new venue. It's like the SoFi Stadium of the ancient world, right? This $6 billion, stadium that opens up, and it's got all the latest technologies or whatever for first century AD. How it transitioned to that, but then also it looks at the apparatus of sports betting and how people bet on chariot racing and gladiatorial fights or bouts, whatever you want to call them, matches. So within that sort of kind of very original and I think really exciting sort of complex of narrative, of narrative plots. The show does some good things, some bad things, but that's the focus of my work right now is looking at this show and thinking about obviously what sort of resonances it has for us today in our sports mad world, how sports betting has become more and more popular every year, not only in the US, but in other countries. How money is really infiltrating sports. Obviously it's been that way in the pros forever, but we know it's also become a big deal in college sports now, right? With NIL and everything. So I'm really interested in why we want to watch shows about sports in ancient Rome and horse racing. So chariot racing and horse racing. So that's what I'm working on right now. Sorry, that was a long.
No, well, on the show, I thought I appreciated it more the second time I watched it, because I picked up on some things maybe I didn't. But you and I talked about a little bit about this off the record. There were a lot of characters compressed into 10 hours, which was a little bit much, and I think they could have cut some of that out. But I think they did a really good job um, setting some of the stage of what the political situation was like back then with Vespasian and his sons. And I thought they did a fantastic job setting out just the casual brutality of life back then, particularly the slave market scenes. That was, I thought, very good. And when Kwame says that the Romans killed his dad because they are Romans, I thought that was a really powerful line. But there were some weaknesses. You mentioned this, there were gators in the or crocodiles in the forum and or the amphitheater. But I also thought Domitian, they portrayed him wrong, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that. Like he was just too comically evil, and there was no subtlety about him. Like one of mine, this is a big nerd thing of show of mine that I like, but Farscape by season two, it really picks up. It's very good, particularly with the character Scorpius, who is a villain, but there are complicated reasons why he's a villain. And so he's not all bad, kind of like Gul Dukat from Deep Space Nine. But there are, to really get in the heavy nerd stuff here, there are reasons that they are the way they are that
Right.
are not entirely bad. But I thought with Domitian, they just made him too stereotypically evil, and he just wasn't
Yeah.
as interesting of a character.
Yeah, you're exactly right on that. I mean, there are, there are lots of ways we can look at it and we can critique it. I mean, clearly, even a Roman historian will tell you that Domitian was actually a pretty good, fairly good emperor. Once you look back on his actual, time in office or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so why is he so creepy in the show and played that way? So there's a number of reasons. One is that, showrunners and filmmakers of shows about and movies about the ancient Roman world don't necessarily read Suetonius. I guess some of them do read Suetonius because it's pretty juicy stuff, but not all of them read Roman history. What they do is watch other shows about ancient Rome, right? So the trope of the crazy evil Roman emperor is so embedded. It's just so embedded in the genre of shows about movies about ancient Rome that you kind of have to have one character, and in this case, there's the two brothers, right? Who is just sort of almost cartoonishly evil. Um, so this kind of dovetails a little bit also, and I think problematically with the fact that he's also portrayed as gay, right? So he has a gay lover who is this very supportive and nice character, all the way through, who ends up, and we all, you can read any cinematic media studies about gay characters and gay lovers, and it's a trope also that one of them has to end up dead, right? Like in any film, horror films or whatever, where there's a group of kids in a cabin, right? The one that answers the phone is the one that ends up dead or whatever. So these are tropes in films, cinematic tropes, plot points, visual points that again, creative people pick up on rather than reading about what the real character of Domitian may have been like or whatever. So I think that, part of it is the cartoonishly evil Roman emperor trope. Part of it is the, sad and ultimately doomed, gay character trope, which again are, really embedded in the minds of screen creatives.
And in the
Um,
Roman literature too, which I thought was
yeah,
interesting about it because I was like, this is problematic, but also it fits with how Suetonius wrote about, how you portrayed your enemies as more feminine or weak.
yeah, absolutely. Suetonius, of course, writing, about the first Caesars, looking back on them, trying to flatter the Caesars that he was working for at the time, right? Then, sort of making them more effeminate and, saying, oh, even Julius Caesar, had an affair with this king in Bithynia or whatever, Caligula was known to do this and that. So making them more cartoonishly evil with a focus on sexuality, sometimes homosexuality, sometimes, effeminacy, sometimes just hypersexuality, sometimes brutality, that kind of, you are absolutely correct. That kind of demonizing, is that, maybe that's not the right word, that kind of disrespecting, sort of saying, mean things about the earlier emperors started with the Romans themselves. So, the other issue with the character of Domitian in the show is that, it's a modern show, so we have to have a psychological we have to have a psychological reason why he is the way he is, right? And so that's because he has an older, more successful brother, right? And so the older, more successful brother becomes sort of like the Maximus figure, right? So in the first Gladiator, we have Commodus, who's the evil emperor, but he's evil because his father didn't love him as much as he loved Maximus. They're not really brothers, but you know what I mean? There's always that Cain and Abel motif, I call it, in movies. There's always going to be two men that are vying for somebody's, love or affection. And in Roman movies, it's often a male authority figure, a father figure, or something like that. So almost every movie about ancient Rome or TV show has a couple of guys in conflict, males, men, in conflict, not usually in a romantic way, but in a way of trying to, the source of the conflict is to get the love or the respect of this senior male figure. So Domitian's psychological reason for being this way, and how Tenax, the other character, the middle class striving character who's trying to trying to rise in society in Rome, he uses that, right? He uses that, he correctly reads that psychological flex on the part of Domitian, and then he uses that to get to rise in the ranks. Domitian is that way because his brother Titus gets chosen as the successor, just like Maximus did, right? Gets chosen, gets all the accolades, for opening the Colosseum and so forth and so forth. So that's the psychological reason. I think Titus also, I really like that actor, Tom Hughes, who plays Titus. I think it's a terrible performance. I mean, like, could he have been more like unappealing? Like he should have been
Yeah,
he should have been a lot,
I
a
I
lot
don't think
sexier.
I don't think that as the series went on, it seemed like the showrunners weren't really sure what to do with Titus, and he
Yeah.
was indecisive. He was, you kept expecting him to be a little more heroic at times, like
Yes.
with the way that they.
This is the guy who's the big successful general. Like he couldn't even stand up to his girlfriend. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, so I thought that was unfortunately, and I like that actor a lot. I loved his portrayal in The Young Victoria. He played Prince Albert, which was a really good performance, and he's done some really good things. And I just thought, like, I don't know if he was on Xanax the whole time or something, but it was
I
just a
it
really
seemed
boring
to
performance.
Yeah, it seemed to me like it was poor writing more than anything else. Just because with him, you were kind of like, okay, well, having him be a little stoic is one thing, but having him just kind of be an indecisive patsy is nonsensical, given the historical reputation he
Right.
has.
Right.
So you're not really doing a great job demonstrating why he has the historical representation he's got. The execution of and we're spoiling a lot, the
Yeah.
execution of the senators and the consul in the amphitheater, I thought was so odd because,
Yeah.
Titus was always so beloved. And I guess that was maybe something to do with the plot that was on his dad's life that they were incorporating in, from the real sources. But I thought that was a little odd, but I did like, Anthony Hopkins was good, and they had the urine tax line from Suetonius, which was in
Yeah.
there, which was a nice touch. I just felt like they could have, and we can talk about this when we get into the Odyssey too, maybe had an editor kind of streamline some of that, maybe a Tony Gilroy type come in like he did for
Yeah.
Rogue One and Andor and be like, no, this is how we need to do it.
Well, you can see in the first few episodes, the Anthony Hopkins is only in the first three episodes, and he also, let's go ahead and call it what it is. He kind of mailed it in a little bit too. But it was absolutely better writing and better directing those first three episodes, and even having Titus have these flashbacks about what his father told him and stuff like that. That gave you something more to kind of identify with his character, to kind of understand why Titus did the things he did. But by the time he gets to the end and they're slaughtering everybody in the Colosseum, um you kind of lose the plot a little bit, like what's the motivation for this? And then you're just supposed to see that it's Tenax manipulating Domitian to manipulate his brother to lose favor, and so that he could, it becomes like that show Succession, where they're just being complete a-holes to each other so that they can rise, and rise or die, I think is the tagline of the
Right.
show. But the first few episodes were directed by Roland Emmerich, the famous Independence Day guy, director, and I think he directed the last couple as well. So you can see that the action is the action sequences are pretty exciting in those. But yeah, the whole center part of the show, it got more into Tenax's life, and we kind of lost the plot with some of the historical characters.
Yeah, and one of the things I think on 10X that I think that would be interesting to see a show, pick this up, and this is one of the challenges when you do shows and movies based on known events, and people who spend a lot of their free time on this topic are kind of, I guess, like Star Wars fans to some extent. They're going to be upset no matter what you do, so it's sort of a losing proposition to some extent. But um, I would, seeing kind of the underworld and the gambling and the betting and the horse racing and all that, that part I actually found very interesting.
Yes.
And between that and the Sons of Hades in HBO's Rome, There's a really good, interesting underworld crime market TV show waiting to be made that you could still tie into whatever's going on at the top of the political uh, state at the time. So that would be something that I think would be really interesting to see portrayed. And I thought this show almost got there, but then it just kind of went off in too many directions.
Yeah, and too many characters and so forth. But you're absolutely right, and this is what I think is really original and really interesting about this show. And we'll see if they get a second season. You know, we have that last shot of Tenax on the boat, like Odysseus, right? Like going off to find out who he is, right? When he finds out that that guy, the guy that might be his father, blah blah blah. So there might be more about that. But what this show does, which very, very few earlier movies and TV shows about ancient Rome ever did, was to explore that middle ground. And of course, like you said, making this kind of, criminal, like, the urban underbelly of the literally underneath the Circus Maximus. I mean, HBO Rome showed us a kind of some middle class. Most of the movies are just the elites, the people that are named, in the histories. We get Caesar, Cleopatra, all that kind of stuff. Then we get slaves, right, or enslaved people and people down there. So very few of the movies and TV about ancient Rome show us the middle ground. There was a little bit about that in the first Spartacus, where the enslaved people, once they rebel, they try to set up their own sort of egalitarian society and so forth. But of course, that all goes to hell. So then HBO Rome tried to show us a little bit more of that business class, the class of people that live on the Aventine, a little bit about the crime, the criminal enterprises with a few characters and so forth. But again, just touching on it, and that show didn't get to last that long either. So what Those About to Die does, as you just articulated, and which I think is really interesting about the show, is to show something that we don't have a lot of historical detail about, but that we know absolutely went on, and that is betting, right? We know that there was large scale and small scale betting on horse racing and then on gladiatorial contests as well. We know there were all kinds of bets, not just winning. It was like who would make it through this many laps, which one would come in second, how, there were all kinds of different kinds of bets, like round bets or whatever we call them today. Um, and yet we don't have a lot of like archaeological, we don't have remnants of what would have been like the betting tavern that they show in the series, that beautiful set underneath there where the guys are writing on the chalkboards and so forth. We, there's millions, literally millions of pieces of dice and game pieces and token pieces and things like that come down in the material record from ancient Rome. So we know, and all through the whole Roman Empire, not just Rome itself, but you go to England right now, right in front of the British Museum. You can walk into any one of those shops and buy tons of little antiquities, which I do all the time. I love dice. For some reason, I just love ancient Roman dice. They just excite me. They're these tiny little things you can hold in your hand, and somebody played with it. You know what I mean? It's just awesome. But anyway, so we know that it was a major part of their cultural experience was gaming, and betting and games of chance and betting on the bigger, sporting events would only make sense given that the Romans were so fanatical about chariot racing. There were factions, right? You probably have read about this. There were four main factions by color, and the whites, the greens, the blues, and the reds, just like they show in the series. And it is absolutely historically accurate that Domitian tried to add two more factions, which did not take, like expansion teams,
Right.
like the Carolina
Right.
Panthers or whatever, So
Oh, well, now hold on, wait. Now we've been to the Super Bowl twice. Now, come on, come on.
I'm just kidding. Um, so expansion teams, Domitian did try to do that. So they kind of what's the word? They collapse the timing of it a little bit in the series, but that is historically accurate that Domitian tried to add golds and purples, but that was not did not stick, shall we say? Those factions did not stick around. But yeah, so the four main factions. Which probably did not have owners in the way that, I think the show did a pretty good job of showing that it wasn't like just like one owner, like Mr. Cronky owns the Rams or whatever, it's more like an ownership group, like with the Dodgers or whatever, where it's, Mr. Walter and Magic Johnson and so forth. So there were probably very rich, very elite people in ownership groups that ran these factions. But then, how did the betting work? Who made the money? Just individuals betting? Did the charioteers themselves, right? Most of whom were slaves, many of whom were from Spain. We do know that, right? Spain had, there was that whole Spanish sort of subplot with the brothers that come from Spain and bring their beautiful horses and so forth. We do know that many of the charioteers were actually from Spain, and some of them bought their freedom. But so were they paid by the factions the way our teams are paid by, the organization? Did they could they bet? They probably couldn't bet, right? Then you're in the Pete Rose zone there, whatever, right? You can't bet on your own races. So how did they make money to buy their freedom? So there's some controversies in terms of the historical record that, we'll let the historians work it out. But I think the show did a very good job of showing how complicated that whole financial world was, and potentially criminal. We do know there are a lot of laws from every period, starting late Republic and very much in the first century, which seems to be the peak season, the peak century of chariot racing and betting and so forth. Going into the first couple of centuries in the CE, there were a lot of recorded laws about betting and so forth. So where there are laws, there is activity, right? And there is criminal activity because people have to make laws about it. So the show, does a good job, I think, of showing that. And then, as you mentioned, it allows the series then to introduce these characters that are working, right? They're working there. They are striving. Some of them, we have records of people that lost tons of money betting. And so, like that one character, Rufus, right, who loses his wife's shares or whatever. So he has to become a spy, and he's like sweeping the tavern floor and blah, blah, blah. So what happened to those people who lost everything? So these things have, some basis in the historical record. And I think the series does a good job of showing it for the narrative reason of allowing more characters of this different class that we don't get to usually see in films and TV shows about ancient Rome.
And it's a good thing to see too, because it was so important. You can't listen to any podcast or read any book before you come across, again, to go back to Suetonius, all the Caesars were degenerate dice
Yeah,
gamblers, pretty much, it seemed.
right.
And then, the Nika riots and the hooliganism that's associated with it. And just, it was such a big deal. I think if you were going to do some sort of a continuation or those about to die, shared integrated universe, whatever, coming back to this part of the underbelly, I think underbelly of Rome would be an interesting way to do it,
Hmm.
because you can tie back into a lot of this stuff over a long period of time and just continue to see how important it is. I mean, I think there's something there to be had. You just got to focus it the right way.
Right, right. Like on HBO Rome in the second season, we see the characters Varanus and Pullo starting to work some sort of, criminal stuff going on with the gangs in the Aventine. Of course, that was before, the Colosseum was built and so forth. This is like in the 30s BC. So there was a little bit of that, but this show is much more, sophisticated and developed, that spectacular CGI Circus Maximus that they show, right? And so, all of the events, even the gladiator fights, took place in the Circus Maximus, right? Before the Colosseum was built, right? So as you can see the Colosseum being built in the background in a number of shots, which is kind of cool. And they did do that, by the way, that sort of that sort of trope of the arena being built was in the TV show, the series Spartacus, Blood and Sand, where they show the building of the new stadium in Capua down in south of Rome. So that was kind of a little bit of a ripoff. Also in the first Gladiator movie, when they first when they leave North Africa and they come to Rome, and the gladiators look up at the Colosseum, and there's that pan shot, and they all say, we didn't know humans could build such things, or whatever. So that kind of thing. So in this series, the Colosseum is being built in the background, but everything's taking place in the Circus Maximus. So you've got the top of the Circus Maximus. You've got the races, of course, the chariot races, but even the smaller events like the burning of Jerusalem one, the sack of Jerusalem little show. And we know that the Romans loved to mix sort of drama with blood sport, like let's do the myth of this, of whatever, where all these people get killed. Let's do the massacre of the suitors at the end of the Odyssey, and just put a bunch of criminals in there and really kill them. The Romans thought that was great, that was awesome. So the series shows the burning, the sack of Jerusalem, right, which was what Titus did, and how he got the slaves to come to Rome to build the Colosseum, right? The Colosseum was built by enslaved people from Titus's conquest of Judea. But underneath the Circus Maximus, then, where you see all the prostitutes, you see the betting taverns, you see little paddocks. We know there were, is that the right word? I'm not a horse person. Little pens, for the horses where they were kept in advance of the races and stuff. That whole underneath, it's pretty cool actually. I think they do a pretty good job of showing all the activity that went on underneath there.
Right. And it was a pricey show. I don't
Yeah.
know if Peacock will do another season, but we'll see.
Yeah,
So,
and Lush, I will put for one little plug in for people who are trying to decide whether to watch it or not. The production design of the show is lush. It's beautiful. The attention to detail down to the smallest little lamp or the stylus that they're using, in some of those, the jewelry, the costumes, the kinds of things that people would be wearing. It's not all like luxurious, stuff. And I loved the way that of course, I'm a sports nerd, but I love the way that the different factions, would the ownership groups would always wear the colors, like they're in blue and white and so that was kind of fun. And of course we do have the historical character of Scorpius, sometimes he's called. You mentioned a Scorpius as well. So Scorpius was a real charioteer who's mentioned in the sources, and that was a great character. He's just he was a great character.
I will not give away how that
Yes.
ends, but that was a compelling ending for
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
him, I thought.
Yeah.
And
And historically supported, probably. That's
oh wow.
probably what happened. Yeah.
You also mentioned last time you were on, most of the sex in these shows is just in the first episode. They front load it. Not in
Yeah.
this one. There is plenty of sex in every episode.
Well,
Um,
this show is obviously, let's go ahead and give credit where credit is due too. It's obviously exceedingly influenced by Game of Thrones aesthetics, right? So not only the part about just having way too many characters, right? Like 30 characters are introduced in the first episode. You have to take notes. So that's a very Game of Thronesy kind of thing. But the constant sexposition, as they call it, right, where there's two characters just talking about, the price of oranges or whatever, and then people are just having sex in the background or whatever. So that sort of sprinkling of the sex, all the way through. So there is a lot of it. Yeah, there is a lot of it, and some of it not even part of the narrative. So
well, from that, let's transition to an upcoming movie, and I'm not talking about the planned Gladiator 3,
oh
which
God.
may get done. I don't know where you're going to go with that, but whatever. Not my call. They are, I think, still filming the Odyssey, and as of today, June 29th, you informed me that the first poster has been leaked. So let's talk a little bit about that poster and then what we think the Odyssey might be focusing on because there's a lot of material there as far as where Nolan's going to take it.
Yeah, so the poster that just came out today, a film by Christopher Nolan, it's a black poster with blue writing, just says The Odyssey with with the definite article, Odyssey, and then a typical Christopher Nolan boast right underneath, shot entirely with IMAX film cameras. So he wants everyone to know how expensive this film is, right, to be shot completely in IMAX. There's a decapitated Greek statue, just a head at the bottom of the poster with some sparks flying, and I think that's kind of smoke. It's very dark. And then it says, and here's the controversy I think that's going to hit. It says the date, 7/17/26, and then the tagline, Defy the Gods.
Yeah, I'm in full disclosure, I just finished the Odyssey this morning. That part lost me because it sure seemed like the gods were the whole reason Odysseus got home. But
Yeah.
well,
So
I
I'm
mean,
not
you and I
sure
have
who,
talked about this. I
yeah.
think Odysseus is kind of a goober, but we'll table that till after the movie comes out, I guess. So what do what do we know so far about, maybe from what's been leaked or what's been written about it, where this movie may go, what part of the Odyssey it may focus on?
So typical with Nolan Productions, right? Not much is being leaked. And, we have a cast of thousands as usual. If you just think about Oppenheimer, I'm thinking of this as his his O period. So he did Oppenheimer and now Odysseus, and who knows who's going to be next. You'll have to, who's that famous hockey player, Bobby Orr? I don't know.
I'd
He's got
watch
to,
that.
yeah, right? He's got to come up with another O. But typical with Nolan Productions, there's a huge cast that have all signed NDAs, so nobody can talk about anything. There's very few set photos that have been leaked. There's a few. If you go grazing through Twitter, you can find some. They're shooting in Italy, in Greece, in Iceland, apparently. I have no idea why. It's pretty clear that Matt Damon is, I think it's assured that Matt Damon is playing Odysseus. So just right there, you can see that, we're going to focus on obviously the post-war Odysseus, not the younger Odysseus. It looks like Anne Hathaway is Penelope. So I did also seem to read a pretty clear affirmation of that. But all the other millions of people that have been cast, there's no, it's just a guessing game at this point who is playing what role. But in terms of what part of the Odyssey, is going to be focused on, um, it's clear that he's going to do all of it. First of all, Christopher Nolan, he does everything. He doesn't like just focus on one part, one person, one part of a biopic, right? When you do a biopic, screenwriting 101, you're supposed to focus on, one part. You don't want to show the whole life of a person, especially if they lived a long time. So, but not Christopher Nolan. He's going to show us a lot more. Um, Second is the size of the cast. Just the sheer size of the cast means that he's going to do the Odyssey part of the Odyssey, which we classicists like to talk about the Odyssey part, which is like you just read it. So, the first 12 books are not all the whole 12 books. The first four books are a little bit different. But anyway, the first half of the Odyssey is Odysseus mostly telling in flashback what he's been through. Some of it is happening in real time. There's parts of it, like in book five and so forth, that are happening in real time. But basically, and this is a gross generalization, and hopefully your classics listeners won't think that I'm simplifying too much. But basically, all the Odyssey stuff, that is the wandering, the excitement, the adventure, the picaresque part of it, is in the first 12 books. Okay. The beginning of book 13 out of 24, he lands on the beach at Ithaca, right? That's where the Phaeacians leave him. They give him some stuff because he can't come home empty-handed. You got to bring home some gifts, or whatever. He's on the beach in Ithaca, and then the second part of the Odyssey, which is the Nostos, the homecoming, the return, is the other challenge he has to face. So he has to get through all those monsters and seductive women and problems with his crew and go to hell and back and everything. But then the second half is how does he reintegrate into his family? How does he get his son back? How does he get his house back? How does he get his dog back, right? How does he get how does he get everything back that he was before? How does he get who he is back? So I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm being sarcastic here, and say that Nolan is going to do all of it. He's going to do all of it, and it's going to be a 3 hour movie, and it's going to have a million people in it, and obviously it's going to have to be edited really tightly. But and then it's going to end with that sort of, I guess it's not a spoiler. Most people have read the Odyssey or at least know what it's like. It's going to end with that very cataclysmic, way that Odysseus gets his identity back, and then Nolan will have to decide if he's going to make it. To your point of Odysseus being kind of a goober, that's a good word. Is Nolan going to make that a heroic uh, reappropriation of his identity as king of Ithaca and husband of Penelope and father to Telemachus? Or is he going to make it more of like a darker kind of thing? There was another recent movie that just came out last fall called The Return with Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche. A nice reunion from one of my favorite movies, The English Patient, from a few years ago, where the movie starts with Ralph Fiennes on the beach at Ithaca when he comes home. So the whole Odyssey part, the first part is all wiped out, but he comes home and the movie just focuses on this veteran's kind of, his trauma of what he's been through and how he uses that trauma to get his life back. And it's a very, very dark look at how that happens. I don't know if you had a chance to watch that, but the final scene, which you know because you just read, is done in a very dark way. I can't say how Christopher Nolan's going to do it, obviously. I would imagine it's not going to be that dark. I'm going to just go ahead and guess that just for the way, like, if you think again about Oppenheimer, and it doesn't mean that an artist can't evolve and Christopher Nolan could do something totally different. But like in Oppenheimer, he kind of glossed over the part where Oppenheimer actually felt pretty bad about making that bomb. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a couple of places where he goes and says, to Truman or whatever, like maybe we shouldn't drop those or whatever. But it's kind of, it doesn't become a focus. His trauma isn't a focus of that movie. It's more the reasons why we did it and so forth. There's that one scene where he's in a lecture hall or something, and all the people start like, doesn't he have like this weird hallucination, Oppenheimer, where the people start like vaporizing as if they were hit by his bomb or whatever, right? But it's like a hallucination or something. So anyway, I think one criticism of Oppenheimer is that it didn't show some of the darker aspects that could have been explored. So I'm gonna guess that this Odysseus will be less of a goober and more of a ladies' man with the goddesses that he meets on his way home. He will be more heroic. He will be more emotional in his scene with his mother in the underworld. He will try to save his men. And then at the end, he will be forced. There'll be some character development to show that he's forced to do this violence in order to get what he wants. He doesn't willingly do it. I'm gonna guess. What do you think? What's your take?
Well, yeah, I don't know how you're gonna fit that much into that short of a period of time. Even if you do it 3 hours, that's a lot to work in there. But I had some thoughts, and this is coming from someone who is not trained in this area, has not read enough about it. So people do not at me. This is just my take as an amateur. But well, it was funny what you were saying about how, he dealt with all these seductive women, and you pick up, he's on the island with Calypso and he's been there for what, like 7 years, and he's in no rush to leave. All he had to do was build a boat, which he apparently knew how to do and doesn't leave. But anyway, so my son in high school, I can't remember what year it was, read the Penelopead by Margaret Atwood, which is kind of from,
Her perspective, uh-huh.
yeah, her perspective. And my son kept coming home. He was like, no, this is wrong. Odysseus was loyal. He was loyal the whole time. And I'm reading the book on the airplane coming back from Scotland. And I text him when we land, and I said, how in the world did you get that Odysseus was loyal? Literally, he's been having sex with Calypso for 7 years. Like, where are you picking this up? And then he texts me and he says, still loyal though, because he came back and protected her from the suitors. And I'm like, what? Do you not understand the difference between loyal and possessiveness?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I guess that as I was thinking about how you're going to make a movie out of this, I have a couple of thoughts. I do think, because we all know Christopher Nolan broke big with Memento, which was a
Right.
great modern noir movie. Um, Odysseus, in some ways, is an unreliable narrator, which is a hallmark of noir cinema,
Mm-hmm.
because his stories about what happened before he gets to the Phaeacians, it's just you have to trust him that he's telling you the truth. You don't see it in real time, which I find interesting. And then he's kind of glosses over a little bit when he's talking to Penelope about what he did. He kind of skips over the time with, he's just like, oh, she wanted me to fall in love with her, but I didn't. And I'm like, well,
Right.
you didn't tell her about the time you slept with her before you left. Okay.
Right.
All right. So I think, do you want to go with heroism and he's fighting against all these odds? I think to make it a compelling story, you're going to have to tweak the source material a little bit.
Yeah.
Have him not fall asleep at every key moment, and then his guys do something stupid, um, and have him kind of be challenging to keep them together. And I think Christopher Nolan, is a smart enough director that he'll
Mm-hmm.
figure that out. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I think he will do it in a good direction. But part of me wonders if the Odyssey would be better as part of an animated story, so you could really see. You buy certain things in animated form that you don't in live action. So I think the Cyclops stuff would come off better animated, and maybe all the involvement with the gods. But that's the interesting part to me, is how is he going to incorporate the fact that this was all driven by Athena?
You said something really interesting, and that was bringing up Memento. I think it is possible that Nolan's take on it could not be a real-time take, that he will actually follow the poem more closely, in the sense that he'll because we meet Odysseus in book five on Calypso's island. So everything, and then she's the one who, right, is forced to, the gods are jealous because she's shacking up with a mortal. That's another thing. I mean, our modern ideas of fidelity, sexual fidelity in marriage. I mean, if a goddess wants you as her can I say F boy?
Right. Yeah, it's fine.
Her boy toy. There's nothing really you can do about that. I mean, and if she sticks you on the island for 7 years, same thing with Circe, even though he was only there for a year, but so there's going to be the Circe episode too, which of course, though, you're right, is part of the flashback part of it. I could see Nolan, um, working in some of that flashback aspect to it, just because that's how his visual vocabulary, his narrative vocabulary works as a director, given the other movie that you were just talking about, which was basically made him, a superstar. So I could see that working. I mean, the Calypso part happens in real time. I'm sure it's maybe going to be Lupita Nyong'o. It could be, I don't know, one of those other, spectacular actresses that are on the list. But, it's one of my favorite parts, actually, in all of ancient literature, where Hermes comes down to her and says, Zeus wants you to let him go, and she's like, you gods are always jealous, when we goddesses get our own boyfriends, you do it all the time. You guys are always sleeping around on the mortal sphere, but when one of us goddesses tries to, get ourselves a toy boy, as they say in Britain. We say boy toy, and in Britain they say toy boy, which is kind of interesting.
Hmm.
That's another podcast, Ben. But when we get ourselves a lover from the mortal realm, you get all butthurt and so, and make us do it. So Calypso is forced to let him go too, right? She doesn't want to
Hmm.
do it. So it's all this hierarchy of, but of course we see Odysseus on the beach crying, Now, in Homer's version, he does want to go home. All right. At this point, he's had enough of the adventuring and he does want to go home and she lets him go. Another useful thing to check out is the old movie. I was kind of look up the date of it. 1997 was a little miniseries back from the miniseries days, The Odyssey with Armand Assante. If you haven't seen that, it is also very instructive. This is the one we show in our classes. It's pretty sexy, not too sexy, but it shows. And this was a '90s product, so a little unevolved. But
Right.
Odysseus,
Yeah, I did watch part of
you
that.
remember that?
Yeah.
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 So the only problem with Armando Sante is that he mumbles, and you have to put the subtitles on, or else you're never gonna be able to follow it. My students are like, "Can we have subtitles?" So he mumbles a lot. But Vanessa Williams played Calypso. Bernadette Peters played Circe. Greta Scacchi played Penelope. It's a really good film, but it's done exactly in real time, right? So I could see Nolan. He's going to see it. Obviously, they'll claim they never did, but they do. And he might stick more to the Homeric narrative in the sense that the Telemachus part happens first, and there's the Telemachus framing in the actual poem, and then we meet Odysseus finally. He goes to the land of the Phaeacians, does some sort of flashback thing, which will be memento-like. Here we are writing the script for them. Look at us.
Right.
And then the Phaeacians take him, and then the second half, which will probably be more of like a third of the film, maybe even less, a quarter of the film, which will be the reintegration into his home, which will also happen in real time. But the first part of it has to set us up for the kind of hero that Nolan wants him to be. Is he going to be forced into violence to take his home back and protect his wife, like your son says? Or is he going to be a more complicated hero who actually, like the Ray Fiennes character, is so stricken by PTSD that he just goes, batshit crazy? So that'll be he has some interesting versions of it to work with, right? And I think I
Yeah.
mentioned to you, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and I do wonder too, because you mentioned this, and now I've been thinking about it, the importance of flashbacks and not and unreliable narratives to Christopher Nolan. Insomnia had a lot of flashbacks, and there was an unreliable narration element with Al Pacino's character about what he could and couldn't remember about what happened. Which that's not a great movie, but it's not a terrible movie. I think it got a little overlooked. But the whole Dark Knight trilogy, of course, is
Right.
built around flashbacks.
That's gonna, you know what? We just found the cheat code, as the kids say.
Right.
This is exactly what's gonna happen. There's gonna
Yeah, so
be,
he's gonna rewrite it now because he listens to this and he's
yes,
like, "Damn
exactly.
it, these two figured it out."
Oh my God, yeah. No, but I would not be surprised if he leans into the flashback flex, shall we say, that is in Homer. And interestingly, when we teach it, right, sometimes we gloss over that because our students want to know what happened with the Cyclops, what happened with the Lotus Eaters, like what happened with the Hell Visit and stuff. Like they want it in real time. And I'm guilty of this, and probably a lot of other classics instructors and professors are too, where we teach it more real timey rather than Odysseus is literally sitting in a chair eating figs, and when the hired guitar player or whatever at the banquet starts singing this song about the Trojan War, dude just starts crying, right? And they're like, all, we see that song has moved you. Who are you? Or whatever. It's a really cinematic moment, and I hope they do it where then he says, well, you probably figured out who I am or where I'm coming from, and let me tell you what happened to me. I could even see that being the opening scene of the movie. Wouldn't that be cool? I just got a little chill.
Yeah, I think telling it out of order does make sense. And I do think too, this will be interesting. There's a real kind of, I don't want to say anti-war, maybe that might be the wrong term for that time period, but it certainly gets into the costs of war.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, Agamemnon, you're dead. Achilles, you're dead. All the guys are dead. Very few of them survive, and Helen survived, and her husband survived, and she's sort of an afterthought in the whole, which is interesting because she sets this whole thing up in many ways. or her character, not her individually,
Right.
but she's just an afterthought in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. And she just has this line, this kind of throwaway line, like, "Oh, they fought that silly war over me."
Yeah. Well, I have a theory about that. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I do think that Nolan is also smart enough about the market right now that he is also going to lean heavily into the story of Telemachus. I forget the name of the young actor who everyone thinks is going to be Telemachus. I'd have to Google it really quick, but I think they're going to lean into that, and I do hope they show Telemachus's visit to Sparta because I think this is one of the just hearing you talk about it, one of the most remarkable scenes in all of ancient literature where she's like, oh, my bad, right? And I think it also speaks a little bit to the character of Helen as not quite mortal. Do you know what I mean? She's almost to the Calypso Circe level, you know. She may be married to Menelaus and obviously has been through therapy, right? And she's like, "Hey, you guys, I got this box of drugs. I'll bring it out, we'll just all chill out, whatever." So it's just this remarkable, sort of comment on this is one way of dealing with trauma. And Helen's way of dealing with it is her box of drugs that she brings out, right, to share with Telemachus and it's and Menelaus and stuff, and how she's sort of above it all. And I think this also kind of, it, for the Greeks, she kind of participated on this other slightly, not quite immortal, but she's not quite just a mortal either. You know what I mean? She's a little bit more semi-divine or whatever. So, but I hope they show that because I think that'll be a great foil for how Odysseus, as a very much a mortal, supported by Athena, how he has to deal with the trauma, the post-war trauma that you mentioned is, I think, a really big part of this of the Odyssey is how do we deal with the aftermath of war? And the Rafe Fiennes movie, I think, is one way of doing it. Again, a very dark way. So I hope you do get a chance to check that one out. It's called The Return.
Yeah, that is one I think we will check out, and Victor and I might do an episode on that. I know we're
Yeah.
going to do one about, depending on when this airs, this will either air before or after the episode we do on the director's cut of Troy. But I think who you were thinking of is Telemachus. They said, look, it's Tom Holland apparently,
Oh yeah,
Spider-Man.
yes, the Spider-Man kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
So
young
that
person.
that will be
Yes.
interesting. Uh, uh, two, maybe three brief things to
Okay.
close us out on. Is there anything else that you've got going on that you want to plug or talk about? You're taking time out of this out of your day to talk with me. So if you've got anything else you want to plug, please do so.
Of the things that I can talk about, I'm the worst person. I always tell secrets, and when I sign things, I'm not supposed to talk about them. But one thing I can talk about is that I have started a new gig with Audible. So I do have a new Audible original coming out at the end of the summer. If anybody has a subscription to Audible or wants to buy one, so look out for my new six-part series called, wait for it, Sex Scandals of Ancient Greece and Rome. So I do 3 episodes on Greece, 3 episodes on Rome. And yes, all my colleagues out there, how did I possibly squeeze it all into 6 half-an-hour episodes? It was very difficult, and obviously there needs to be a sequel. So I have that coming out, and I've got a couple of other Audible originals in the planning. I'm also working for the Great Courses company. I have a couple of video courses in development. Nothing that I can talk about just yet, but I am also going to do some tours for the Great Courses. I have designed a tour of Greece, starting in Athens, going through the Peloponnese, and up to Delphi and back to Athens. So I have that coming up next year. One scheduled for May and one scheduled for October. So I encourage your listeners to check out the Great Courses journeys, not just for mine, but there is our colleague Steve Tuck, who works on Pompeii and has a big series coming out this summer as well. He designed the tour to Italy, and that looks really amazing. So Steve is a classicist and a good friend, and someone you should definitely interview. You definitely need to reach out to him. He would be great. But they have many, many different journeys all over Europe and Asia and Africa, and it's a new gig. It's a new venture for the great courses, and I'm lucky that I got in on it to design the Greece tours for them. So yeah, so that's coming up in 2026, May of 26. Bookings are now open. Just go to the website, put down a deposit, hold your place. Yeah, and at the end of this month, I'll be in New Zealand delivering that lecture. And I encourage everybody to check out my newly redesigned LinkedIn, where I have put a lot of my videos of my lectures and stuff like that on um on a like a little page on my LinkedIn. My chief brand officer slash husband designed for me. My CBO design a nice new LinkedIn page for me. So if you want to hear any of my, my blabbing on about this stuff, there's a few things there. So
All right. And give us a future podcast episode to do here, as well as a good book to read. It can be any book of any type.
ooh, well, right now I am reading this very fascinating book because I love actors and actresses and so forth. And it is Judi Dench's book, Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent is the name of it. And it is this absolutely just you know Judi Dench as this great actress, and I don't know if she had a ghostwriter or whatever, but it's an absolutely sparkling book talking about her her career and what it's like to have had such an amazing career, specifically doing a lot of really really famous work like Shakespeare. So that's the one that I'm looking at right now. Yeah, I've suddenly become very fascinated with I guess I've always been sort of an Anglophile, but I've been really fascinated with British English history, really like Wars of the Roses kind of stuff. We're talking really old stuff, medieval and Tudor. So yeah, so as soon as I train myself in some more Tudor stuff, I'll be happy to come back and talk to you about the sex lives of the six wives, which is my new podcast that not podcast Audible original that I'm going to pitch to them. So you heard it here first.
All right. Fantastic. Fantastic. That sounds great. Now, if you want to stay in touch with the podcast, go to the website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Check out the socials, either at Duke FB Coverage or at Antiquity Pod. Hey, why don't you give us a call, 540-632-0160. Leave a message, and you'll get an episode. Thanks to Brent Arehart, who put this wonderful theme music together. And stay tuned, folks. More episodes are coming because, as you know, the Classical Antiquity Sidequest is a podcast without end.